Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Journey Through Sonship podcast. I am Calvin Calhoun, and today we're going to continue looking at the dating roles, and this is part two to the It Starts at Home message. And of course, we're dealing with parents and their roles in the dating phase of their children's lives. Now, as we said in part one, really quickly, is that in the early parts of any child's life, what should be the focus? Securing their identity, molding their character, preparing them for the future, preparing them for what God has for them through their education, in relationships as relates to friends and associates, and preparing for their occupation and the things that are the desires of their heart. That is what we should be focused on. Now, of course, dating kind of comes into play, especially in the times where we talk about hormones, puberty. They start getting these feelings and emotions, the physiological changes in young men, the physiological changes in young women. But it's the parents' responsibility to help guide them through that phase, help keep them focused on the things that is important. Now, one of the things as a parent that I have learned and I vowed to do, and I said vowed to do, and I mean this because it's very important, is I'm very transparent with my children about my childhood, the things a lot of the mistakes and errors I made as a child, even in the disobedient and rebellious parts of my life, but also the relationship mistakes that I made, misunderstandings of love, dealing with anger, those types of things that I struggled with in my childhood, in my teenage years, and in my young adult years. I'm very transparent with my children. I let them know those struggles. I let them know where I made mistakes at. But I also let them know how God restored me, how God healed me, how God brought me out, the consequences of those things, and helping them understand that there are consequences for certain actions, but also how God worked it out for me and taught me a new and better way. And so when it comes to dating, let me say this to you. This is probably the most important part of the message right here. When it comes to dating, it's so easy for children to believe that their parents are perfect when they never ever hear about the mistakes and the errors that you made in that part of your life. Now let's listen to me. David in Psalm 51 expressed his feelings, his remorse for what he had done with having Uriah killed when he took Bathsheba, after Nathan the prophet came and gave him the word of the Lord. Psalm 51 is a pouring out of his heart, but it's also a show that he wanted to be healed. But then towards the middle of Psalm 51, he says this: restore unto me the joy of thy salvation, and uphold me with thy free spirit. Then he says, then will I teach transgressors thy ways. David would use what could be the embarrassment, the shame. He used his errors that he made in his life, that he can teach others not to make those errors, but also to show the redemption and the reconciliation character of God and how they can be healed and restored. As a parent, I know we want to give this image that we got it all together, but we never had all together. We made mistakes. And true love will always help someone along the way not make mistakes that you make. So why would that be any different for the dating phase of our lives for our children? When you want your children to not make the same mistakes that you made? One of the things Bianca and I really vowed, and I say vowed again, not to do is to tell our children something, but not tell them why. Okay, not tell them why. We don't really subscribe to the whole, you do it because I told you so. Because we know what happens when you say that to a child. Curiosity builds in, and then they'll go and try and do the very thing you told them what not to do. Now listen, not every child gonna be perfect. They're gonna, sometimes you're gonna tell them why and they're gonna still do it. I did that. Listen, that I learned from it too. The punishment, I got the very consequences that my mom and my dad told me I was gonna get when I did the wrong thing. But when it came to the dating and relationship phase of our lives, parents, it's very important that you share with your children those mistakes that you made, the errors that you made, so that your children do not repeat those errors. Because what happens then is when we don't share those errors with our children and our children get into that situation and you see it, then you just tell them, hey, don't do that. Why? Because I said so. That's just not the right thing to do. And they're like, well, why are you're not giving me a reason. When the reason is your life, your testimony. But you're ashamed that if you tell it, then your children are going to see you differently. No. I'm not telling you have to share all the extremely gory details. I am saying that you need to tell them about your mental state, the decisions you were making, the consequences of making that type of decision, but also share the goodness of God and how he reconciled, healed you, and restored you. And guess what that does? When you're transparent like that, your children feel free to come tell you whatever it is that's going on. Because your children need it. And while they're under your care and they're not married, there's a point where we have to go from really harnessing their maturity and growing them and kind of pushing them along and pulling them along to more of an advisory role, especially as they get older and they get into their adult phase of their lives. And I'm talking about that time you go to, like when your child goes to college. Let me tell you, they will see every walk of life in college. Every religion, they'll see it. And that's why the Bible says train up a what? A child in the way. Because when they get old, they won't what? Depart from it. We have to provide a firm foundation even when it comes to viewing relationships. We need to teach the importance of your future, the importance of your destiny and your purpose that God has for you, and how you have to treat that with the utmost importance. And haphazardly dating and haphazardly enter into marriages that end in divorce and hurt and trauma, getting linked up with the wrong purpose or the wrong person can distort your purpose. It can hinder you from walking fully in the things that God has for you. Yeah, that's why you don't enter into dating haphazardly. But that's why as a parent, when your children become older, it's very important to go into a wisdom and counsel role. Why? Because they have to, if you've trained them up, they got to be able to pray. They got to be able to hear God. They got to be able to see what this relationship is. And they got to be able to be free. Listen to me. They got to be able to feel free to come to you for wisdom and understanding and counsel. Listen to me. It's very important that you don't take too many emotional shots at it. And what I mean by that is this. There'll be times that it's an emotional situation as a parent. And yes, you should be able to share in that emotion. But when it comes to giving wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, that can't be emotional. That needs to be spiritual. That needs to be spiritual. Because if you talk as a parent from your emotions, you could be talking from a place where you yourself have not truly been healed. And then what do? You pass that type of emotional feeling over to your children. And then they act out of emotion and not out of the wisdom of God. See, that's why you got to get healed. You got to get healed before you enter into marriage. You got to get healed in the dating phase of your life. You got to allow God to fix those things where the enemy is hiding. You have to, and where he's pulling the strings and tugging at your emotions to get you to act out of the character of God. But parents, you have to show them the way. And part of showing them the way is sharing your very life. The things that you went through as a child, as a young adult, as a young woman, as a young man, guess what? Was not just for you. It was for your life to be a testimony to others that will come behind you. and most of all, to your children. Your children need to hear your testimony, because if they don't, they will outsource to their friends, and we know they're outsourced to the world. And you already know what happened with you. They're bound to repeat it. They're bound to repeat it. And let me tell you something, you can share the wisdom of God with them and they'll still go and do the wrong thing. That's okay. That's what we got: repentance, mercy, compassion, gentleness, kindness, love. That's what we have that for. And they should always feel that they can come home. They should be able to come home and receive that healing, receive that restoration, receive that love. And boy, when we get ready to talk about the church, woo, I'm telling you, that's a whole nother phase of dating that has to be addressed. But as pertains to you as the parent, be transparent with your children. Be transparent. Share with them your life experiences, the mistakes you made, whether it's just regular life experiences or in the dating phase. I share with my children the mistakes that I've made in dating, the mistakes I made as a child, all that. I share that with them so they can understand that when they do these things, these are the consequences. This is how you grow. This is how you don't make that error. But they understand why we don't do it. Always share the whys. Share the whys. Because when you share the whys, you give them wisdom. They can never say they never heard you. They can always know that they knew what the consequences was. When they're faced with that situation, they know the consequences from the very beginning, and they don't have to go through experience to say, oh, well, yeah, my mom and my dad told me that. They don't have to. They've heard those consequences from the very beginning before it's time to make those decisions. So I urge you to continue to pray with your children, model Christ before your children, but be transparent with your children. Guide them by the wisdom, knowledge, and counsel of God. Guide them. Share in their emotions, but when it's time to share wisdom and counsel, let it come from Christ. Let it come from a spiritual place, because that is what will last forever. That is what will help them discern situations in their life, whether those things are fruitful or whether those things are unfruitful. So I thank you for joining me on the Journey Through Sonship podcast. Be strong in the Lord, in the power of his might. Continue to love one another more today than you did the day before. May God bless you till we meet again on the Journey Through Sonship podcast.